Bronte, your story is interesting. When I read your little brief, and I do apologise. We probably should have been introduced to Bronte Price up front rather than do it at the back end of the interview. But let's chat about your life story and what you're doing now, because it's a really interesting story in itself.
Thank you. So I was brought up on a farm in South Australia, and I'm in my 60s as well, and began my career as a teacher, and then ended up as a senior public servant for the past couple of decades. And I, about 6 years ago, became a marriage celebrant and funeral celebrant. And just through stories and responses I had from couples that I was marrying and people I was dealing with in the funeral industry, it became really clear that there was a need to educate the broader community about how to be an inclusive workplace. And so I established a thing called the Equality Network, and we run both face-to-face courses when we can and online courses all the time for workplaces to help them understand how to be an inclusive workplace. And there's simple little things you can do, but the courses just help you understand kind of what it's like to be from the LGBTIQ plus community, so you get to stand in our shoes for a little bit of time.
Bronte, interestingly, you're a young teenager coming to terms with your own sexuality in the 70s when, as you spoke about before, it was not a good time. I can recall vividly the ridicule heaped upon youngsters that I was at school with during the time, and I can only imagine the horror that you would have had to live through. But based on that start to your life coming to terms with your sexuality to now, do you think the community, even if the leaders aren't, do you think the community in general is ready to be more accepting and understanding?
Yeah, it is very much so. It took me 42 years to come out. I was married to a woman because it was just unsafe to come out at that time in small country towns where I was teaching, and and I had children. I think that we've moved lots along the road towards true equality. Part of the problem is that lots of the legislation that deals with discrimination and vilification and harassment and so on against all people, but we're talking about the LGBTIQ plus community, is territory and state-based. And so bit by bit, it's like having this massive jigsaw, and, you can't just, with one piece of legislation at federal level, suddenly make the world much more rainbow-coloured. It's much more complicated than that. And there are still members of the LGBTIQ plus community who are, discriminated against in legislation. It's still today okay for teachers and doctors and healthcare workers and so on to be dismissed because of their sexuality by some organisations that they work for. And so there's still, what I'm saying is we have come a long way, and we can sense that there is a change in the tone and the mood and the support and embracement of the wider community, but there's still work to be done.
Are you optimistic that there's more people doing the things that you're doing to help bridge the gap, open doors, bang on doors in the case of some to get our leaders to make the change? Because it's all very well if the community are open to accept it, but if they're not educated, that won't happen. It has to come from leadership. Are your networks, do you think, now strong enough and influential enough to make that difference soon?
I think there's numerous organisations that have sprung up over the past decade or two that have shown incredible leadership for various sections of the LGBTIQ plus community. And I've always had a view, I guess as a former teacher, that education is always the key. And, we've got to accept that you'll never educate all the people, but you'll educate as many as you can and get people to understand, that a whole heap of things around our community, our culture, our history, our language, that they wouldn't have understood before. And to be fair, I think, the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, has some senior people there who are, I think, concerned about the fact that the queer community wasn't included in the most recent census. And they're certainly working very hard to put in place some standards that will ensure that the LGBTIQ plus community will be included in the next census in 5 years' time. I find that's really encouraging.
Bronte, I've enjoyed this chat. It's your first time. I'd like to get you back on again some other time because there's so much more to explore and about educate. And I think I talk about the privileged position. I sit here in front of a microphone, but we keep just trying to bring information to the community and let them work through it themselves. But this is an area that has been hidden for far too long, and I'm more than happy to have you come back on, and we'll talk more about it, how we can make the place better for all, more understanding for all. But your debut has been greatly received. I thank you very much for your openness and honesty, and we'll do it some more.
I'd love to. Thanks, Rob.
All the very best. Bronte Price, he works for an organisation called Equality Network, and it's an interesting subject. It's an ongoing subject. I think our minds continually open a little bit, but like most things that involve change, and we only have to look at how long it took for marriage equality to happen, how a lot of things in our political sphere, the wheels turn very slowly. It takes a long time to get things right. But when you have so many people in positions of power through church and government, as I said, who are still very anti-gay, and that's clear and obvious in their rhetoric, we're not going to move quickly, but we need to weed them out very quickly and change social attitude.